the general thing about a New Ager is I think genuinely they are in a pursuit of truth. But the thing that they miss is that they believe the truth is a what. And so as they try a million different whats, the one who's actually seeking truth will eventually realize that there is no truth in a what because they are a who. The only way you could experience a relationship, understand another person, is through the who. If they're seeking the truth, if they realize that the truth can't be a what because every what leads them to another what, there has to be this thing that is true. And that truth becomes Christ. And in the beginning, it becomes Christ consciousness, maybe. In the beginning, maybe it's Christ is a great teacher and he mirrored this thing, but all paths lead to the same mountaintop. But no other religion claims that God became man. Well, that falls apart pretty quick, doesn't it? And so I think in that continual pursuit of truth, they'll arrive at a similar place that I was, where if they feel that Christ is the thing, they kind of can't accept anything else other than orthodoxy.
All right, welcome everybody to The Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew. This is our podcast series where real people share their real stories of encountering Christ in their discovery of and ultimately conversion to Holy Orthodoxy. Our guest today is Edward Troy. I guess I should ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Troise.
Troise, okay. Edward Troise here is a fitness coach focused on eliminating pain and building a body that can handle anything life throws at it. You can find more information about his work at trainwithet.com, or you can find him on Instagram, both of which will be linked in the description below. Edward here became Orthodox about 2.5 years ago through the ever-growing New Age to Orthodox spiritual pipeline. So without further ado, Edward, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matthew. I appreciate the opportunity to share my testimony and story to the one true, holy Catholic Apostolic Church, the Orthodox Church. So I am a Orthodox Christian. I am a husband, a father, and a coach. And my journey to Orthodoxy was quite unorthodox in many ways. And so
Pun
to,
intended.
to kind of to preface all of that, I think starting, my early childhood is helpful. I was raised Catholic, but it was kind of like, dad didn't go to church. Mom kind of felt like I was forced to go to church with her, kind of a feeling. It wasn't a very theologically oriented choice of Catholicism. It was like my mom was just raised Catholic, went to Catholic school in the 70s, and that was just kind of the thing for us. So as I grew older, I really just started falling away from the faith as a whole, or believing in a creationist kind of worldview, pretty much through school and public school propaganda and the indoctrination of evolutionary theory and the ideas of just this materialistic biological worldview that are pushed on kids from earlier than they could even form a worldview, right? So between the kind of teenage angst, my obsession with bodybuilding and looking at all these guys in superhuman kind of physiques, and me wanting to achieve that, knowing the only way to achieve that is through super physiological levels of
Steroids.
testosterone, which can only come from an exogenous place. I was kind of like, well, man, I want that. And that was kind of like the Ronnie Coleman era of bodybuilding, that
Jay
kind of
Cutler and all those guys.
peak rivalry, early 2000s, early 2010s. And I was just so obsessed. And I that was that kind of void that comes from not having God in your life needs to be filled somewhere else, right? And so I was chasing that through just like trying to put tissue on my body. That I'm only 5'7", hardly, with freaking shoes on, and I wanted to like not be able to walk through a door frame. That was kind of my end goal. And
Leave a
so
giant coffin.
yeah, yeah, I need a 4E coffin instead of a shoe. You know. If they make like New Balance wide, coffins, that was my goal. And throughout that pursuit, as I continued to move toward like manipulating my biology at first through like over the counter supplements, because back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there was a lot of these like experimental pro hormones and kind of like gray line over the counter kind of stuff, where by the time I was 16, I was just messing with myself like a scientist who had no clue what he was doing. And in that process, I just kept falling further away from the faith, or any faith in general, moving more towards chasing girls and chasing physique and doing all this, very surface level, aesthetically driven kind of stuff, And throughout that process, I did get to a point where I started using steroids. So I was doing a steroid cycle that I gifted myself for my 19th birthday. And at that point in my life, I had already had a ton of injuries. And so that supraphysiological level of testosterone made me feel invincible. And I felt like, man, I'm king of the world. I know everything. This is my dream. This is everything. And when it came to coming off of that cycle, because back at that time too, like TRT wasn't a thing, having a doctor prescribe you stuff wasn't a thing, or the open conversation about it just wasn't there like it is now. And I don't think that's a good thing. But it was certainly a sketchier thing to do at my age when I was doing it, 13, 14 years ago. And so I just bought it off the biggest meathead at the gym. The post-cycle therapy he gave me wound up being junk, basically. So I went from, in that year, dieting down for my first natural bodybuilding competition, although I'd been taking the, questionably natural stuff, to dropping a 400-pound barbell on my left leg, tearing my left quadricep, lost, 30, 40 pounds, to being 200 pounds as a bodybuilder on steroids in 10 months, basically. So when you lose weight, your hormone profile drops when you're natural, especially when you get to like bodybuilding levels of competition fat. So tanked my entire endocrine system, exogenously manipulated my entire endocrine system, and then basically cold turkeyed that. And so my spiritual journey really started there again, because at this point, when I came off that cycle, the next 18 months of my life was pure hell, like biologically. As a 19, 20-year-old dude with like no testosterone being produced naturally, very, very lost place for me at that time in my life. And so because the amount of pain built up so deeply, because this kind of bodybuilding identity had to die for me, I wound up turning to a lot of drugs. And that wound up being kind of like the underground EDM, nightclub, house music, techno music scene in Brooklyn, New York City, because I was raised on Long Island. So the fruits of that period of my life was that it did reopen my eyes to this kind of mystical reality. And this is where I think it was my post on Instagram that kind of inspired this invitation to your podcast of the new age mindset that I started to adopt, which was just like a Frankenstein theology, Frankenstein philosophy, kind of believing this, kind of doing that, kind of pulling from esoteric, kind of pulling from occult, kind of pulling from him. Like it just very slowly became this very complicated but also fragile worldview that I was developing, because those substances, MDMA, mushrooms, LSD, all that stuff, it all dissolves boundary. That is their primary thing. Is they dissolve boundaries and they fragment psyches. And so along that path of continual fragmentation, you become very open to just about everything. Right. So it's almost like something doesn't have to be true. It just has to sound true enough and you believe it. And I found myself very deep in that kind of rabbit hole. And I found myself becoming very unhealthy as I continued to pursue that for the next few years after coming off of that steroid cycle. Now, I wound up at that point working at like an alternative health and water store on Long Island. And that brought me away from partying, but still very deep into psychedelics, still very deep into like thinking about yoga and veganism and a lot of these other kinds of pursuits that come with opening your eyes for the first time to alternative health stuff, right? It's really easy to fall into those rabbit holes, and it's really easy to not have any form of legitimate discernment. Even if your body's telling you something, you could believe something so much that you ignore it. And so I found myself in that cycle, particularly with veganism for a few years, where like I was emaciated, I was weak, my testosterone was clearly just tanked because of what I've done in the past. Not that it's not achievable for everyone, not that it's, you know, the right or wrong. It was just, it was so bad for me in particular at that time in my life, especially. And that led to tons of other, you know, just mental challenges because I was so undernourished. I was so out of whack hormonally. I was so out of whack spiritually. And I basically just doubled down on yoga because it seemed to be the only thing that felt like grounding at that time in my life. So I wound up doing like a deep 30-day immersive ashram style experience at like the #1 rated hatha yoga studio in America at the time. They're no longer in operation anymore. But, you know, I had a Vedic astrologer and I had a mantra that this Vedic astrologer gave me. I was told to take the left-handed path by this Vedic astrologer, which is like rub dead people's ashes on your body and have orgies because God is in all of it too.
Wow.
And so I was really given some very dark information that I began to kind of bite down on. And throughout that process, I wound up going and living in Hawaii for a bit, and that really left me ungrounded. I was doing more mushrooms than anyone should ever do. I was smoking weed more than anyone should ever smoke weed. And I got to a point where during my last, you know, mushroom trip, I literally called my mom and I'm like, I'm coming home. And there was just this really powerful urge of like, I need to stop. I need to stop doing this. Went home from Hawaii and moving from, you know, that ashram experience plus La La Land paradise accumulating about a year and then going into the dense populated concrete jungle of New York City suburbs. I was so distraught that I like couldn't hold a job that required me to like have a conversation with someone.
Wow.
So, like, I couldn't make a smoothie bowl because my anxiety was so high that I had to work, like, in the back of a smoothie shop doing prep stuff.
Mm.
And so I was just fried, so culture shocked, so paradigm shocked at that point in my life that everything just felt like a wreck. And so my mom sent me back to the yoga studio. They were doing like a 1 year retreat or whatever it was, a reunion kind of thing for past teacher trainings. And on that vacation, I wound up falling in love with my now wife.
Mm.
And she saw my, you know, Hawaii flip flop. She just left Hawaii recently. So it's just like all these funny coincidences that kind of brought us together. She worked at a restaurant and I was like dead broke. And the first thing I said, I'm like, when I go there, I am not going to this restaurant. First thing I did, went to that restaurant and glory to God that I did because I have her in my life now, you know?
Amen.
Um,
So
and
at what
so
age is this? Is this like mid-20s now?
yeah, so I met her, I was 24 at that
Okay.
point. So all of that past story was like 19 and a half to 24. Now we meet, we fall madly in love, and like 3 months later, she's pregnant.
Mm.
I don't know this
Fast
girl.
track.
Life is crazy, and now I got a kid on the way. Like, what is going on? So we moved to Sedona because that was where I met her. That's where her whole family's here in Arizona, where we're at now. And that was where our journey toward Christ really began, was living in the most bizarre spiritual community, which is Sedona, Arizona. And just seeing the fruits of that lifestyle in a lot of people. Like a lot of our friends were having kids in a similar position as us. They kind of just met each other, things moving fast, etc. And everyone seemed to be splitting immediately. It
Mm.
went from madly in love to baby on the way, which is really the only thing that happens after madly in love, ideally, and then split, co-parenting, chasing other people, and all this stuff. Where we found ourselves continually drawing nearer to each other in this new scenario, you know. And so 2020 comes around, we have our first son, and obviously the coof pops up, and at that point. I had been starting to listen to a lot of like very rigorous Protestant arguments against the New Age. Because at that point in my life, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, you know, it seems like I'm standing on broken glass in terms of my worldview, my beliefs. It's like I say I believe in this bizarre Hindu pantheon, and yet there's somehow an objective order that we all share. I
Mm,
believe in objective ethics and morality, and yet I have to borrow that from Christianity. And I kind of believe still in this ambiguous idea of how we got here, and yet I'm living in a spiritual reality. And everything just kept not adding up in any kind of logical way for me, that I started looking for answers through, it was actually through some podcasts on like an alternative health field. And it was one of those, well, what's his name? He's a new King James guy, like the only new King James argument, Stephen Anderson or something like that. Anyway, for any Protestants or people looking at it, they probably know. I think he's a Baptist, like a hardcore Baptist guy. So I found people who were following him, and I also found this guy, Stephen Bankars, who like owned a $40,000 a month recurring revenue new age website that he like publicly renounced, found Christ in whatever Pentecostal way he found Christ. But he was making a lot of these Christian ethos, generally speaking, arguments against the new age kind of mindset and ethos and philosophy and theology that just started making a ton of sense. But they were very black and white, right? It was very if then, very good, bad, very no gray area. It's either from God or purely demonic, right?
yeah.
So
Hard
having a bunch
boundaries.
of yeah, and having a bunch of mystical experiences like that just wasn't good enough for me. Basically, it didn't give me answers. It gave me something to kind of counteract this worldview that I'm in, but it was so hard and so rigid that it didn't actually answer any real questions that I had, right? And so in 2020, midway through that year, me and my wife, proclaimed the name of Jesus. I threw away all my occult books, all my esoteric books, all my Hindu posters, all of my chakra posters, all that stuff. And I just bought a Bible, and I said, I'm only going to read this for a year, and I'm just going to see what happens. Within that year, I find a bunch of people online. I find this guy named Chuck Missler, listened to like every lecture that he had. And he was pretty cool. He takes a lot of the materialist, atheistic, evolutionary mindset and like really in a very scientific way puts it in a Christian box. And, so it satisfied that kind of rationalistic
Yeah.
post version of me, pre drugs, pre mystical experiences. And it like lit that side of my brain up. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. But there was still this mystery, this kind of unfilled void of those types of Christian examples, Christian arguments, that kind of thing. And at that time, I've always been into, geopolitics and a lot of the kind of conspiratorial rabbit holes. So I find guys like Jay Dyer and all those guys in that kind of sphere. And I start realizing a good chunk of them are Orthodox, right? So then for like a year straight, I just go binge every Orthodox verse, debate. A lot of them were Jay's, some of them were other people's. And that for me just continually resonated as this like answer. Like this is the piece of Christianity that I never knew existed, B, never looked into, and C, didn't realize was actually the answers I was looking for. Because every substance, whether it's as soft, even though it's very hard substance now, like weed, all the way through to the most aggressive psychedelic, they will always leave you with an absorbent amount more of questions than they will ever give you answers. And then it creates that loop of like, well, I need more answers, which means I need another dose, which means I'm going to walk out of that with 1,000 more questions again. And that was like that perpetual cycle for me for years. And so at that point, I'm like, wait a sec, like, okay, that question was answered. This question's been answered. That question's been answered. This question's been answered. I just kept getting all of those internal dialogue, soul noose based like questions about reality that I had only had glimpses to through the veil being peeled back, exogenously. That everything just became like looking at life in 4K HD on a big screen TV for me for the first time ever.
Mm.
because the only clarity I ever experienced was during a completely lewd state, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was finally this like very sobering spiritual experience that I had that I'm like, this is it. And because I came from that very mystical mindset and I wasn't getting it anywhere else, the icons made sense. Like I got all these bizarre, colorful tattoos and I love art and, veneration makes sense and prayers to the saint, like all of it just made sense. I didn't have any Western precondition to think these things are weird because what I believed was a million times crazier.
Mm.
I'm talking to this guy at Whole Foods in Sedona and he's a dragon. And I'm like, yeah, you are, dude.
Blue eyes, white dragon.
Yeah, like you're a Yu-Gi-Oh card, dude. you know, it's like, I read your Akashic record. I do. And it's like all of that stuff is so clearly delusional and
Mhm.
prideful and full of prelest and narcissism and just craziness that when you put it into the Orthodox box, having that kind of experience, it's like, oh, you're missing Christ. And all this stuff kind of has some partial truth to it, but outside of the fullness of Christ, you're never going to find it. And that just landed with me so hard one day. And I was never really too drawn toward Protestantism or anything else. I wasn't really drawn to like Pentecostalism because it just looks like New Age dressed as Christian, basically.
Mm.
Where you have these light language girls talking gibberish,
Yeah.
and then you also have Pentecostals talking gibberish, and so like it basically was like, okay, Protestantism maybe, but no, and what else is there? And Orthodoxy just happened to be that thing that was like everything I could have ever looked for in my spiritual pursuit over the last, that was like an 8-year spiritual pursuit,
Mhm.
from 19-ish all the way through to 2020 would have put me at 26, 27, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 27, turning 27 at that time. And I was kind of just like a closet Orthodox guy for a bit, like said I believed all this stuff, watched every video online, believed everything, watched every priest, every, theologian, whatever you want to call them, debater, all of it. I just became obsessive with it. And then I remember finding, I think it was a Father Josiah Trenum video, talking to this whole internet orthosphere and being like, if none of this is bringing you anywhere other than a church, like it's not it. And I'm like, gosh,
Yeah. Eventually, you got to
dang.
go to church.
Yeah. And so, I consider I have like two first experiences in an Orthodox church. The first one, not fake as in like my intention, but knowing it wasn't going to work out because at that point, the nearest church was an hour and 20 minutes away. I had a 2.5-year-old and a newborn, and all of this is brand new.
Yeah.
So it's like, how could I expect almost 3 hours, especially if there's a little bit of traffic, which there would be, of commute with a newborn and a 2.5-year-old to then go sit in this weird new place that's
Yeah.
so quiet. And it was a small church and an elderly
And where was
population.
your wife in this journey? Did she even know
I,
about
I was
Orthodoxy, or did you introduce it to her?
so blessed, dude, because I know this can be a big point of contention in a lot of relationships where I was always far more invested into any sort of spiritual beliefs than she ever was. She was kind of like a free floater in her beliefs, where it was kind of like she knows these things, but she doesn't have a hardcore yoga practice. Like I used to have a Kundalini yoga practice where I'd hold my arms over my head for 46 minutes at a time, doing a breathing drill and repeating a particular mantra, and so I was deep in it. She was just kind of like, whatever. I'm a mom now. She quit all of her weed and all that stuff just by becoming a mom, becoming pregnant. So like everything just changed there for her in more of just a grounded way. And for me, I was just kind of like off in this pursuit of trying to figure stuff out. So navigating into orthodoxy was very easy for us. It was more like we both understand that good and evil are not two sides of the same coin anymore, which was like that 2020 revelation. Like I can't keep saying yin yang. I can't keep saying they're
Um,
just equal opposites and they necessitate each other. Like there is clearly a complete lack of whatever goodness is in evil. It is not just an opposite, it is the complete inversion of it. And that really stuck out to me. And so grateful to God for this, it was just an easy thing. Her path has been a little bit more slower, a little bit more practical, way less theology based, way more like, being Orthodox rather than knowing about Orthodoxy to be Orthodox. But I was very blessed in that scenario where I was just kind of the leader in the scenario. She trusted me. She believed in this direction at the least, and my discernment in this is the direction of the general direction we're heading in. She just kind of bought in.
Yeah. That's a blessing. So you don't have to like convince her like, hey babe, you want to
Yeah.
drive 2.5 hours with our
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
babies and
Yep.
for this
Yep.
weird esoteric,
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what's going on here? Leaving with like my sinuses are draining because of the incense and stuff. And I always had sensitive allergies. But it's aside from the point. So that was like our first fake exposure to it. The first real exposure to it really put the nail in the coffin for me with Orthodoxy. And it was when we bought a house sight unseen, never been to the town on the other side of the country. We just wanted to like homestead as an experiment. And we end up in this middle of nowhere, old North Carolina tobacco town, population of 10,000 people across like 40 square miles, little Walmart supercenter, and a tiny little town that's falling apart, and that's it. And we realized that there was an Orthodox church about 30 minutes from us. So at that point, my newborn was, 6 months, almost the, 8 months, 9 months area where a little bit more manageable, easier to, no nap time and whatever, before he was walking. And my older son, like we had such a big change in our life that we're like, you know what? Let's make this like a part of this big change. Like, let's make going to church something that we're in this weird spot where everything is new, nothing's familiar for the kids, nothing's familiar about the environment. Like, let's just make this unfamiliar thing a part of that and make it familiar over time. So the very first liturgy I go to, they hand us the little pamphlet for the service with the hymns and the gospel readings and stuff. And we go sit at coffee hour. Our priest comes over to us. And before he does that, I'm looking through the pamphlet and I realize he has the same area code phone number as me.
Huh.
And so my priest sits down. I'm like, Father, where on Long Island are you from? And he's like, oh, I was, I started, or I was a long-term priest at the Greek Orthodox Church in Wantagh, New York. Now, my father, I can't tell you the amount of beers I drank behind your church in high school. He's like, oh, I
Wow.
called the cops on you a few times. And I'm like, you certainly did. We'd go to the Greek festival drunk and do all that kind of stuff. And so right around the block from me, a place where I'd ride my bike to go walk into the woods with the, senior's older brother who dropped off a 30-pack of Natty Ice. He was there
That's crazy.
for at least a decade of my childhood and like
Wow.
my older childhood. And so I get goosebumps every time I say it. I get, just what in the middle of a city, in the middle of a state we never wanted to be in, never thought we'd live there, but out of desperation based on the cross country move, we like had to get into a house basically. Because every month we stayed in the Airbnb would have been an extra $6,000 we couldn't put to a down payment, which means our actual purchase power drops, so much more. And then we'd be living in a really bad situation if that scenario happened. And here he is, the priest that baptizes us, baptizes my kids, marries us, right around the block from me my whole childhood. And that was just it for me. After that moment, I looked at Selena, my wife, not wife at the time. We were married in the church. We were married beforehand. So we didn't have to do any of the kind of double marriages stuff. And I was just like, this is it. This is it.
Wow.
And so that was 2022 by the time we got there. Sorry, 2020. Yeah, 2022. We were brought into the church 2023. And then this December would be my third year now in the church.
Wow.
So a
That's
long
awesome.
20-minute story, 25-minute story for anyone who cares to
No, I
listen.
love it. I mean, you pretty much answered all the beats of the questions I
Yeah,
usually ask.
yeah, yeah. And it really just felt like one of those things that anytime I've had many conversations with friends who are new age or, considering Christ or some kind of Christocentric worldview. And I'm like, hey, like awesome, but like I'm gonna encourage you to seek orthodoxy because it is, that's what I have to do. But what this whole thing really taught me was like the importance, the value, and the timing of like allowing the wrestling match to continue until the point you get submitted.
Mm,
Where it's like, hey man, like, okay, cool, you bought the Orthodox Study Bible, but you're afraid to go to liturgy. Like, just wrestle with it.
mhm,
Like it's okay. And like the reality of that idea is like God won't force us. I can't force you. And I can't give you some kind of proclamation that's a guarantee. So all I can encourage is the hashing out, the wrestling, the process, the journey, because those are the things that's going to actually allow God to talk to you in whatever way that you need to be talked to.
mhm.
That then leads you to where you're led.
Right, right.
And so that whole journey, just like it's just so amazing.
Well, let me ask you, as someone who was into the New Age stuff, um, my understanding of why the New Age to Orthodoxy pipeline is a thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you would be the person to tell this, but it, New Age is attracted because it offers mystical reality. It offers mysticism. It offers metaphysics that,
Yes.
I guess, is not very prevalent in Western Christianity. Um, and so, like for people that are seeking Christ, who is a mystery, like God is a mystery, right? He's a mystical being. We can't like fully understand God. Um, so that's like a desire that doesn't get fulfilled from anything Western, and so um, it gets sought out in Eastern philosophy, so like Buddhism, Hinduism,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
Yep. Yep.
So the attraction of Orthodoxy is a discovery of, obviously true Christianity, ancient Christianity, but a Christianity that has the mysticism that was lacked in the Western Christianity. Is that kind of like what the attraction is from a New Ager to the Orthodox faith?
Well, I I think it's maybe even a little bit broader than that. Um, within that mystical carryover though. But I think what happens for the vast majority of the New Agers is two things. The first thing is there is a counter culture movement that takes place within that, right? They think Christianity's been manipulated. They think it's entirely politically intertwined. They think it's corrupt. They have these bizarre ideas about who Christ even is in the first place that doesn't actually give them a comprehensive understanding of what it is. And so it's very easy to see the flavors of Christianity that are in the West and brush them off as something incomplete, corrupt, led by just men making up their own ideas because everyone's Bible only, but Joey says something different than Peter, and Peter believes that Joey is completely wrong and actually heretical to the point that he's not a Christian, yet he's a Bible church, and that's a Bible church, and this church is having women priests, and this church is doing sanctifying gay marriage, and like all of these things. And it's just easy for a person to be like, well, okay, like this is obviously not real,
Yeah, there's no
right?
unity.
And so that countercultural movement leads to the complete opposite, which is esoteric, right? Because if Christianity is an exoteric thing, generally speaking, unless you find some weird Gnostic versions of a church or whatever, like it's going to be an exoteric delivery of the faith, whatever they consider faith, right? So that counterculture moves to esoteric, which is hidden, which is subjective, which is this primer of the ego. It strokes the pride. It fulfills the physical. It's this, oh, You did 7 grams of mushrooms? Well, I did ayahuasca, so I know more, so it's
Your
this
level of
kind of
wisdom is tied to how much drugs you do.
yeah, yeah, and generally speaking, experience is the easiest way for someone to believe something. And so when you have these substances exogenously or through breath work or through meditation or but whatever you wind up finding in that esoteric flavor because it is an internal driver, it's not an external thing. It's all within you.
You just need an
You
external substance to unlock that.
yeah, exactly. Not contradictory at all. They'll fight that one tooth and nail. Um, but that proclivity leads them to this idea of mysticism, which then leaves them open to anything. Because if something is esoteric, if something is mystical, and you can't fully put your finger on it objectively, now everyone is a guru who you think is a guru because they have something that you don't. But that's developed through their internal pursuit of exacerbating their pride and their sense of self to a point that becomes higher than you. And so you wind up chasing these delusional people with a lot of times bad hearts.
Mm,
And they lead people further astray because everything is open for interpretation and everything's game.
mm,
And that's where you could have a vulnerable, esoterically minded person who believes they're a dragon and they're talking to dragons and they're having vivid dreams or they're channeling light language or whatever it is because everything goes. And the second thing, the general thing about a new ager is I think genuinely they are in a pursuit of truth. But the thing that they miss is that they believe the truth is a what. And so as they try a million different whats, the one who's actually seeking truth will eventually realize that there is no truth in a what
right.
because they are a who. The only way you could experience a relationship, understand another person is through the who. Right?
Right.
Like what my dad did versus who my dad is are two very different things. And it doesn't express the fullness of what he did a few times versus who he actually is as my father in my heart. And, like as I become a father, I get to appreciate him in so many different ways where I would focus on those what's rather than that who. And not to make some kind of bizarre comparison to who God is with my dad. Like that's not the scenario, but just like in essence, they realize this thing. And so I think naturally, if they're seeking the truth, if they realize that the truth can't be a what, because every what leads them to another what, there has to be this thing that is true. And that truth becomes Christ. And in the beginning, it becomes Christ consciousness, maybe. In the beginning, maybe it's Christ is a great teacher and he mirrored this thing, but all paths lead to the same mountaintop, but no other religion claims that God became man. Well, that falls apart pretty quick, doesn't it? And so I think in that continual pursuit of truth, they'll arrive at a similar place that I was, where if they feel that Christ is the thing, they kind of can't accept anything else other than orthodoxy because it's the only thing that's going to actually create the worldview that allows God to fit into their experiences and answer the questions that have been answered.
And orthodoxy is, because it's the truth, it's 100% Christ who is the truth, right? It's not 99% Christ. It's not
Yes.
95% Christ.
And it allows you to understand that, if you were into chakras, like there's an energy that animates this body, but it comes from the one who holds it all together. And so if you're pursuing the thing that's doing that, but you're missing the fullness of how that could even be there in the first place, you're always going to end up chasing your own tail. And I think people get exhausted at trying to be their own God. I really do. I think that's like kind of the end point in a new ager's life is they realize this whole manifestation, be a co-creator, you create your life. Like what's in front of you in the quantum field is collapsed and what's behind you is only potential. It's like, no, my ropes are back there. My banner's back there. The icons are back there. The quantum field is there. And it's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre, the things that they will believe. And then the arguments they'll use against Christianity are just ancient heresies or things that no actual Christian, right, Orthodox Christian would ever believe. And even many Western Christians would say, like, there's arguments for this, like this has been taken care of. This new age guy on a podcast who's having some doomsdayer Gospel of Philip guy on, like, oh my God, the gospels are corrupt and this is the real gospel. It's like, guys.
Oh, man, it's funny. I got people sending me these books that are Gnostic books, and they're like, "This will change everything." And I'm like, "Oh, guys, like,
just start
it's
digging
been
with a
1,000 years."
spoon.
Like,
Dig with a spoon, and you'll find that this is just nonsense. You don't need an excavator to figure some of this stuff out. But because their worldview is so open, and because of that countercultural narrative in themselves, they will value that over the exoteric, for everyone truth that is the real gospel and the faith of the Orthodox Church. And I think that the thing with it too is there is a Western mindedness and an Eastern mindedness, right? The Western mindedness wants to know about everything. The Eastern mindedness is okay with knowing that there aren't things we can know, or that there are things we can't know, I should say. And that general soil is very easy to understand Orthodoxy, where they're not going to come from a hardcore Protestant background and think you're some kind of idolater because you have an icon on your wall.
mm-hmm. Right.
They're not going to ask their sinner buddy John to pray for them and not think that there's someone else they could pray to who's actually lived a legitimate Christian life, right? Even though they're not here with us. Those things, they land with them, and it makes so much sense. And I think the main thing with it is a lot of them will struggle with like full submission in the beginning, where they'll try and marry these ideas a bit too much and be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but at least 1 foot in. And then the
Well, it's hard to
full
go from being
conversion
your own God to a slave of God. I mean, right?
to fully submitting. And that is the biggest, false light that they just cling on to, is this identity and assumption that they are the center of everything. And because that's what all of it is. And that center of everything is also ambiguous and nothing, and part of a karmic wheel that you're going to come back as a cockroach in your next life. Like, really? It's
Well,
like,
now
well,
that you
why are you
became
here in the
Orthodox,
first place?
man, you're lower than a cockroach next life.
Yeah.
I mean, well, let me ask about. Okay, so I'm excited to talk to another fitness enthusiast. And I'm going to talk about myself for a little bit before I get into my question. But my channel is called The Body Ascetic.
Yes.
And the idea of the body aesthetic is something that's been 15 years in the making for me. I started off as a book, and ultimately it was really kind of my brand, my approach to fitness, incorporating the Orthodox spiritual life in that. And 15 years ago, that like was non-existent. Now it's commonly talked about, but so that was kind of the original intention for my channel, was to express this brand. Got other plans, so I've been doing this convert interview series, which has been, thank God, blessed. But so my approach to fitness was, um, like I'm a powerlifter. That was my sport, but my approach to powerlifting was, um, essentially train like a powerlifter but eat like a bodybuilder. And so I would try to be as lean as possible in competition, versus like the kind of typical powerlifting mentality is like, it doesn't, like, all that matters is raw strength, not relative strength. So it doesn't matter how chunky or big you are. It's just whatever you can pull, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I was approaching it with how strong could I be with how light I could be.
Yep.
And so I would try to compete in the lowest weight class. And it was even to the point where I won a competition because I was the only person in my weight class at my age. I was like 26 or 27 in like a 128 pound weight class or something like that. So
Wow.
that's one way you can win, is when you have no competition.
You get your participation trophy.
Yeah. So I kind of took that brand and then tried to infuse Orthodox mentality to it. And the idea was to appeal to basically young Edward, because a lot of young men were in the same situation that they were. You know, they're looking at bodybuilding influencers and just being like, I want to be like that. A lot of times not realizing that they're like that because of, like what you said, supernatural, you know, abuse, drug abuse, really. Um, and so they go down this pipeline of chasing aesthetics. So they're eating like crazy, trying to bulk up, and pretty much doing really unhealthy habits in order to achieve an unhealthy physique, right? Um, so my offer was to, you know, pursue aesthetics versus aesthetics, right? So because inherently fitness is an ascetical practice
Yes.
in a real sense, and part of my channel brand was always trying to uh, like advertise almost asceticism, but through a worldly lens. Because if you can kind of understand asceticism fundamentally as being focused on a goal, worshiping a goal, right? Asceticism is worshiping God and doing routine practice as you get closer and closer to God, which is this goal. Um, but it says asceticism can be applied to pretty much any goal. It's being focused on a goal and taking repetitive action, you know, towards it. So, like in the context of, you know, the Orthodox spiritual life, monks, they their goal is Christ, their goal is God, and their routine practice is obviously routine liturgies and vesperal services and other kinds of services and routine work and, you know, prayer, and it's all a routine ritual thing to approach, you know, the ultimate goal of Christ. Um, so so with that being said, how has becoming Orthodox changed the way you view fitness from when you were a young man and you were pursuing it as really a means to achieve meaning?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I think the kind of ascetic mindset of the body was initially developed through my yoga practice, right? Because that is a a movement system that is inherently designed to worship deities, right? And so I was kind of in that mindset about the body from those days. Now, when I had my first son, I looked in the mirror and I'm like, man, like I am weak. I am fragile. I am dislocating my left shoulder on a 20-pound dumbbell press because of past injuries and stuff. Like, this is bad. I need to get strong again. And I wanted to get strong in a way that I hadn't gotten strong in the past because the no matter how surface or no matter how much virtue you can extract from a particular physical practice, if your heart is not in that disposition and you're chasing it from a different place, you're never going to develop the virtue, right? And there are people who are bodybuilders and are highly ascetic people, very ascetic people. There are some people who are masochistic in it because they're trying to fill some void of not being good enough, right? And everything else in between those two sides of the spectrum. But so I wanted to do it in a way that obviously wasn't um in the beginning, you know, I was still doing yoga. So like that worldview was still kind of like, oh, like maybe some flowier movements like animal flow or steel maces with the
Mm,
kind of, you know, strength training of the East and that kind of stuff became just more interesting to me. And then I found some, you know, certain things that eventually wound up really working for me that didn't necessarily have to be paired with some kind of theological worldview.
mm.
It's starting to get hot in here, bro. I'm sweating. It's like 100 degrees outside.
You had a
I'm in this garage.
sauna session
Yeah, basically,
with this
dude.
podcast.
Basically. And so, you know, as I started getting stronger, I started realizing I was no longer getting stronger for any personal desire, but like to be a better dad, to be out of pain, you know, to want to help people. And that was like what sparked my desire to start coaching again because, you know, when I was the high school bodybuilder, I was writing all the workouts for my buddies. They were training with me. I was always kind of like this coach mindset was always something that was just a part of me. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll make this my business. Maybe I'll make this my path, my career, my, you know, pursuit at the, you know, intent of doing it to better my life for my kids at the time. And then as I, you know, became Orthodox and I started putting fitness into that box and my career into that box, two things came from it. The first is the presuppositions that I have about the body are informed by my faith. So we are both objectively, intelligently organized in a manner that you have a proximal biceps tendon that inserts and orients in a very similar way at your shoulder, and a distal biceps tendon that orients at your elbow, right? So there is a very objective framework to the human body that is intelligent and organized. And there has to be principles in place that allow us to operate that thing efficiently. So I started chasing biomechanics, human biomechanics, primarily related to the 5 main kind of buckets we could put biomechanics into, which would be walking, jogging, sprinting, swinging, throwing, catching, and carrying. Those 5 kinds of things. And in that pursuit, I also found myself getting strong enough to go get a chest pump and do a shoulder press without dislocating my left shoulder. So I kind of compartmentalized it in like we both have an intelligent way to wield and use this body. And we also have free will, which means if I want to have a sick chest because I want to have a sick chest, and do bench press because I love bench press, and squat because I love squatting, it's there. Right. And that's like that kind of personalized side of it. And then we also have the objective side of it. So my fitness has been informed by that both and non-dialectical tensioning kind of format of the faith. And then it's also just become the way that I look at my training is it is the least I could do to willfully physically suffer on a daily basis in hopes to accumulate a minuscule fraction of suffering that Christ went through for us as fully God and fully man. And the way that comes into my coaching is I am Orthodox and I coach. I am not an Orthodox coach. Like, fitness isn't my faith. My faith is not intertwined. It is informed by it because it is who I am. And the who that I am is doing the thing. So like the last thing I want to do is be like, oh, are you a 30-year-old Orthodox Christian man looking for a fitness coach who's crushing it in his business, but just can't seem to lose weight? Like, no. I will help everyone and anyone that I can because Christ is for everyone. And if I could demonstrate the smallest amount of that with people knowing who I am and what I believe, like, that is the best service I think I could give in my career to show what it means to be Orthodox, right? And then just everything flows from there. You know, like I was on another Orthodox podcast a while ago, and she's like, "How do you integrate your faith into your business?" And I'm like, I kind of don't, because I don't think I have
naturally. I mean,
it just is. You know, I don't have to do anything. It's just who I am, and that's going to permeate through what I do. And so if I just focus on me and the who I am relationally to Christ, then everything else is going to come from there.
I love the way you put that. And this is not a knock on converts, but it's a common thing where it's like, you know, they get excited about Orthodoxy and then they're like, how can I put Orthodoxy in everything I do? And so they start, you know, an Orthodox this and Orthodox that business. And, you know, so it's kind of like what you're saying, but Orthodoxy is not a brand. It's not a style. It's not an aesthetic. It's the right worship of the one true God. And so the more that we become Orthodox in our spiritual practice, the more we go to church, the more we attend liturgies, the more we confess, the more we commune, partake in the life of the church, the sacraments, and prayer and communing with God, the more we become Orthodox, right? And we ascend the ladder of divine ascent and get closer to Christ. And the closer we get to Christ, the more he shines through us. And that everything we do is informed with the Christ within us, right? Because I struggle with that too. Like I told you I used to be a fitness coach, but professionally I'm in the oil and gas world as an engineer, and I've always struggled with like, how do I be Orthodox in this completely like non-Orthodox environment? Like I'm working with like every ethnicity, every nationality, every religion, and we're doing something that, you know, I like to joke with people, I get paid to destroy the environment. Like not a very Orthodox thing about it. Like, um, but so it's like I struggle with that, but that is the answer: is that you pursue Christ in your spiritual life, and the closer you get to Him in that pursuit, the more everything you do becomes informed through that grace that's bestowed upon you. Right? Nothing that we achieve out of our own power. So yeah, I like the way you put that.
Sorry, it's just way too hot in that garage, dude. I was like ripping.
It's okay.
Gosh, I already did a sauna today too. Oh my goodness, this AC feels so good. Thank God for AC. Wow.
Yeah. God
Um,
bless the man that
yeah,
invented it. So.
yeah. I think to your point, I like it. It took me like 2.5 years to make my first social media post about Orthodoxy or me being Orthodox. And it's because when I see online, zealous catechumens or whatever, like they're still in that trying to find identity phase, and they're prematurely zealous, I think, in a lot of ways. And I think the majority of converts are younger dudes now. And so it's easy to kind of be in your 20s and think you found the answer, and like this is the thing, but they don't realize yet that like this is just the starting line. And that fire of the faith that it gives you in the beginning, like there's real work in order to maintain that, in order to keep that, in order to grow that. And like they haven't even gotten to that point just yet. And so, like, if I'm going to share about Orthodoxy, like, I'm not a theologian. I don't care to argue who's right, who's wrong. Like, that's just not my path in this faith yet, at least. Maybe later in my life, maybe. But I'm very reserved in that way, because if I'm going to do it, I want to do it in a way that's going to meet someone in an honest way that is approachable to the way it manifests in someone's life, not necessarily the information or the knowing about it, right?
Mhm.
And I love that idea in Orthodoxy where it's like, a theologian is someone who prays, right? It's like, that's a real theologian, because God rather than knowing about him, everything. And that's the big Western Eastern split, I think, in a lot of ways theologically. Um,
Mhm.
and with that, I think it's it's gotta be hard for those guys that are doing it, prematurely in some ways, where it's like, get ready with me for liturgy. And it's like, cool, like it's social media, it's the medium we're dealing with, and it will attract certain people to it, but like it's so much more than that. And I think the beauty of it is very enticing at first, and then depending on the person, depending on how long it takes, but like there's nothing to do but just be brutally confronted with your own sin at liturgy.
Mhm.
And it's like, if and the beauty and everything, like that's all a part of it, of course, but like that is designed to overwhelm us in such a way that actually gets us to see like who we actually are in that moment comparatively to Christ. And I think in a lot of ways it's something that people are missing, because the beauty is so infatuating and so intense and amazing, with what maybe they've experienced otherwise in churches and things like that. And that's what's inspiring them to share. But that's not all of it, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but it's just a part of the world we're in, man.
Like everything,
You can't.
like everything, there's a honeymoon phase, right? So, and that's a constant cycle too. I mean, you go through periods of on fire and then periods of despondency, and
Yes.
that's the spiritual struggle. It's a spiritual life. Last, I want to make one reference. He's, I think he's Deacon Ezra now, but he was Subdeacon Ezra at the time. But he has this um, History of Orthodoxy series somewhere on YouTube. If you search Subdeacon Ezra, EZRA, amazing. Like, I grew up Orthodox, but I love that series because it honestly taught me a lot that I didn't even know. But one thing he talks about is kind of the Western mentality versus the Eastern mentality. and not in a way that disparages either or, but for example, like he uses the example of understanding a tree. The Western approach to understanding a tree is chopping it down, counting the rings, studying the inside, basically like scientifically breaking it down and understanding how it functions and how you can tell what weather patterns it experiences based on the rings and how old it is and all those things are a way to understand a tree. And then everything that is learned from that, putting that in a book, and then that knowledge contained in the book, people will read that, and then that's how they learn about a tree. Versus the Eastern experience of understanding a tree is planting a tree, watering it, growing it, watching it grow, um, experiencing sitting under the shade, building a swing on it for your kids
Right.
to swing on it, or like falling in love under the tree or whatever. Like, it's an
Okay.
experience,
Yeah.
um, and that experience is transformational, right? And
Yeah.
so that is the Orthodox approach, right? Is our experience of going to church and experiencing God in the ways that we can through the sacraments. That is a transformational journey that, as St. Paul says, we empty ourselves so that Christ, you know, fills us up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, like to also dovetail it back to how it's affected my fitness and my coaching and stuff, I have a phrase that once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Once you experience it, you can't unexperience it. And for me as a coach, my goal is to get someone's body to experience something that they cannot forget, that is so different from what they're used to, that then gives them that glimpse into possibility of what they're capable of, or they're able to get out of pain, or they're able to move in a way that they could bend down and pick up their kid and not have a back spasm, or that kind of stuff. So
Mm,
that experiential side of the nature of the faith is definitely something that carries over into my business as well.
yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Edward. We're at the top of the hour, so I think that's a good place to stop.
Perfect, man. I appreciate your time.
Of course, appreciate yours. Thanks everyone for watching. Go see Edward at his Instagram account, edward.troise. It'll be linked below. And then you can find him at trainwithet.com for his one-on-one coaching services. Go support your Orthodox brothers and sisters. And God willing, we'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.